They said the cities were myths. Then the sonar hit stone. In 2001, a marine survey off the coast of India detected something impossible. Not debris, not reefs. A geometric grid of stone structures buried beneath the sea floor, aligned with mathematical precision. Streets, walls, foundations. A city where no city was supposed to exist. The official explanation came quickly. Too quickly. Natural formations. Coincidence. Misinterpretation. But stone does not arrange itself into right angles. Erosion does not build staircases. And oceans do not hide civilizations by accident. Across the world, from Japan to the Caribbean, from the Mediterranean to the North Sea, the same discovery kept repeating. Advanced urban structures. Mapped, measured, photographed, then quietly reclassified. These cities were not lost. They were found and then buried again. Because if they are real, history does not start where we were told it does. And the first city was never meant to surface. For centuries, the ocean has been treated as a boundary, a graveyard for ships, a divider between continents. What it was never supposed to be was an archive. More than 70% of this planet remains underwater, and most of it has never been systematically explored. Yet modern history was written as if nothing of consequence ever happened there. Civilization, we were told, began on dry land after the last ice age. Before that, humans were scattered, primitive, incapable of cities. That assumption no longer holds. In the last few decades, advances in sonar mapping, satellite imaging, and deep-sea diving have revealed something consistent and deeply inconvenient. Stone structures beneath the oceans, not random piles, not collapsed coastlines, but cities planned, engineered, and deliberately built. Roads with curvature, foundations aligned to cardinal directions, blocks weighing tons, cut with precision. These discoveries did not occur in one place. They appeared independently, across different oceans, under different governments, studied by different research teams. India, Japan, Greece, Egypt, the Caribbean, Northern Europe. Each site initially treated as a breakthrough. And then the pattern repeated. The findings were reframed. The dates were softened. The language shifted from structures to formations. Funding slowed. Access narrowed. Public discussion evaporated. Not through a single global conspiracy, but through something quieter. Academic risk management, institutional inertia, and an unspoken rule about how far back history is allowed to go. What links these submerged cities is not just that they sank. Sea levels rose after the last ice age. That much is uncontested. What links them is what they revealed before the water came. Urban planning, monumental architecture, societies capable of organizing labor, shaping stone, and understanding their environment at a level that predates the official rise of civilization by thousands of years. This is not about Atlantis as fantasy. It is about a repeated archaeological contradiction. If even one of these cities is as old as the evidence suggests, then human history is incomplete. If several are, then the timeline is wrong. And if all of them are, then an entire chapter of civilization unfolded, flourished, and disappeared before we were ever taught to look for it. The first story is already classified. The first city was not discovered by archaeologists. It was found by accident. In the late 1990s, India's National Institute of Ocean Technology began routine sonar surveys in the Arabian Sea off the coast of Gujarat. The mission was practical, not historical. They were mapping the seabed for geological and environmental research. Then the scans returned shapes that should not exist underwater. Rectilinear patterns. Long, straight alignments. Large stone blocks arranged in grids. At a depth of nearly 40 meters. Something extensive was resting where only sediment was expected. Then the divers went down. What they encountered was not debris. It was architecture. Stone walls stretching for hundreds of meters. Platform foundations. Anchors carved from single blocks of rock, weighing several tons each. Streets laid out in parallel lines. This was not a shipwreck. It was a city, and it was sitting directly off the modern coastline, precisely where ancient texts claimed an advanced settlement once stood. The Mahabharata calls it Dvarka. Marine archaeologists recovered artifacts from the site, worked stone, pottery fragments, tools shaped by human hands. Carbon dating of organic material trapped beneath the structures produced dates that immediately raised alarms. Some samples pointed back more than 9,000 years. Older than Mesopotamia. Older than Egypt. Older than any civilization officially recognized as capable of building cities. The measurements didn't match. The timeline broke. The data refused to cooperate. At first, the discovery was announced publicly. Press releases used careful language. Possible remains, submerged structures. But as independent researchers began to focus on the dating results, the tone changed. Follow-up expeditions were delayed. Access became restricted. The word city quietly disappeared from official descriptions, replaced with habitation site, then later, anomalous formations. No one denied the structures existed. They denied what they implied. Because Dvarka was not supposed to be real. Not like this. In Indian tradition, it was described as a vast, planned city that sank beneath the sea after a catastrophic event. For decades, that account was categorized as symbolic mythology, useful culturally, dangerous historically. If Dvarka was myth, it could be ignored. If Dvarka was history, everything shifted. One marine engineer involved in the survey later admitted the scale of the site was never fully published. The city extended far beyond the initially mapped area. Streets intersected at consistent angles. The anchors suggested organized maritime trade. This was a coastal capital, not a fishing village. There was a cost. One diver involved in early recovery operations suffered permanent lung damage during rushed deepwater work. He never returned to the site. His name does not appear in the final reports. Today, Dvarka is acknowledged but contained. It exists in footnotes, cautiously framed, carefully dated, stripped of its most disruptive implications. No large-scale international excavation is underway. No global rewrite followed. The city was found. The city was measured. And then it was quietly sealed beneath acceptable language. Carbon dates beyond 9,000 BCE were marked inconclusive. The second city was discovered in open water by someone who was not looking for history at all. In 1986, a Japanese diving instructor named Kihachiro Aratake was surveying the waters near Yonaguni Island, the westernmost edge of Japan. The area was known for strong currents and migrating hammerhead sharks. During a routine dive, Aratake descended along a rocky slope and saw something that immediately felt wrong. The seabed did not look fractured. It looked organized. What rose from the ocean floor was massive, A stepped structure nearly the size of a city block, carved into solid bedrock. Flat terraces stacked with sharp edges, straight corridors, angular corners cut at precise 90-degree angles. This was not rubble. It was not collapsed cliff. It was geometry. Then the measurements began. Marine geologists mapped the structure and found symmetrical platforms, stair-like ascents, and what appeared to be roadways and retaining walls. One section resembled a ceremonial staircase, each step uniform in height and depth. Another showed parallel grooves running across stone faces, evenly spaced, as if made by tools. The scans disagreed. Erosion didn't explain this. Nature avoids straight lines. Professor Masaki Kimura of the University of the Ryukyus conducted years of underwater surveys. He documented terraces, pillars, arch-like formations, and what he identified as a central plaza. The scale was enormous, over 50 meters long, carved directly from the bedrock, not assembled from loose stones. If it was natural, it was the most orderly natural formation ever recorded underwater. If it was artificial, it shouldn't exist at all. As footage spread, the response was immediate and divided. Some researchers called it a lost civilization. Others moved just as quickly to shut that idea down. The official classification shifted to natural sandstone formation altered by tectonic activity. The word monument became controversial. Funding followed the safer explanation. But the stone surfaces told a different story. Close-up analysis revealed linear striations, parallel marks that ran across vertical faces where wave erosion should not reach. These were not random scratches. They repeated at consistent depths and angles. The same pattern appeared on multiple surfaces, suggesting intentional shaping. Tool marks, not water damage. No one could explain what tools. No one could explain when. No one agreed on how. The age was the real problem. If the structure was built before submersion, it had to predate the end of the last ice age, when sea levels were far lower. That pushed construction back more than 10,000 years. At a time when the region was supposedly inhabited only by small, nomadic groups. One local fisherman involved in guiding early dive teams lost his boat after it was requisitioned for survey purposes. He was never compensated. He stopped speaking to researchers altogether. Today, Yonaguni still exists. Divers can visit it. Videos circulate freely. But its interpretation is frozen. Official papers frame it as a geological curiosity. No large-scale excavation is permitted. No definitive ruling is issued. It sits in limbo, too precise to ignore, too old to accept. The same striation patterns were logged across 6 separate stone faces. The third city was never supposed to be controversial. That was a mistake. In 1967, a British oceanographer named Nicholas Fleming was conducting underwater surveys off the southern coast of Greece, near the island of Elafonisos. The waters were shallow, clear, and considered archaeologically unremarkable. Then the sonar outlines appeared. Not fragments, not ruins scattered by waves. An intact city plan, resting calmly beneath 3 meters of water. Its name would later be Pavlopetri. What made Pavlopetri different was not mystery, but clarity. Streets were visible from above. Rectangular building foundations formed neighborhoods. Courtyards opened into narrow lanes. There were tombs, staircases, even what appeared to be a central administrative complex. This was not interpretation. It was mapping. In 2009, modern sonar and 3D imaging completed what Fleming had started. Pavlopetri became the oldest fully mapped submerged city in the world. Every structure was documented. Every road measured. The layout showed deliberate urban planning, zones for housing, industry, and burial. Nothing accidental. The city was dated to at least 5,000 years old. Then older. Pottery styles linked it to the early Bronze Age. Structural layers beneath that suggested occupation stretching further back. Some estimates pushed initial construction to 7,000 years ago, long before classical Greece, long before the rise of Mycenaean power that history credits with early European urbanism. The maps didn't fit. The order was too advanced. The timing was wrong. Pavlopetri wasn't a village. It was a functioning port city, with access routes designed for maritime trade. Its streets followed consistent widths. Buildings shared standardized proportions. This implied regulation, governance, a civic authority capable of enforcing design across generations. No myth was attached to Pavlopetri. No epic poem. No religious text to dismiss. It was inconvenient precisely because it was mundane. Just a city, quietly sitting where it had always been. And then the pause began. Excavation permits slowed. The site was designated protected zone, not to preserve it for study, but to prevent disturbance, which meant no digging, no core sampling beneath key structures, no deeper timeline testing. The city could be admired, but not interrogated. One researcher involved in the 2009 mapping later admitted that subsurface scans hinted at earlier construction phases beneath the visible ruins. Those data sets were never formally published. Funding shifted to coastal preservation. Academic interest moved on. There was a cost. A local fisherman who had navigated the area for decades lost access to traditional routes when exclusion zones were established. His family business collapsed within 2 years. The city endured. The people above it paid. Pavlopetri still rests in shallow water, visible even to amateur divers. It is cited in textbooks as an archaeological success story, proof that underwater archaeology works. What those summaries omit is what Pavlopetri quietly proves. Urban planning in Europe did not begin where the timeline says it did. It was already there, before the sea reclaimed it. The mapped road network predates Mycenaean Greece by over a millennium. The fourth city was known to exist before it was ever found. That should have made it safe. Ancient Greek historians wrote about it openly. Herodotus named it. Temple records referenced it. Merchants sailed through it. Thonis to the Egyptians. Heracleion to the Greeks. A vast port city at the mouth of the Nile, where gods were crowned and empires traded. Then, sometime around the 2nd century BC, it vanished beneath the sea. For over 1,000 years, historians assumed the accounts were exaggerated. A symbolic city, a mislocated harbor, something poetic, not literal. In 2000, that assumption collapsed. French marine archaeologist Frank Gaudio located the city beneath the Bay of Aboukir using sub-bottom sonar and magnetometry. What emerged from the sediment was not a ruin. It was a metropolis. Temples larger than football fields. Canals wide enough for fleets. Colossal statues weighing over 70 tons. Toppled but intact. This was not gradual decay. This was sudden failure. This was collapse. The evidence showed the city had been built on unstable clay and sand. A seismic event, possibly an earthquake combined with flooding, triggered liquefaction. The ground turned to slurry. Buildings tilted, slid, and sank. Entire districts dropped below sea level within hours. Stone does not sink gently. Cities do not drown slowly. Divers recovered inscriptions confirming the city's name. Gold coins, bronze statues, ceremonial vessels, a massive stele identical to one found on land, proving historical accounts were precise. Thonis, Heraclean was not myth. It was infrastructure, and it was older than expected. Structural layers suggested the city had been active for centuries before classical Egypt's late dynasties. Its engineering, complex canal systems, standardized docks, massive stone anchors, implied advanced maritime logistics long before such capability was officially credited. Then the narrative narrowed. Public announcements focused on spectacle. Statues, gold, museum exhibitions. What received less attention were the questions raised by the city's scale and age. How was such a complex port sustained so early? Why did its engineering surpass neighboring settlements? Why did its disappearance align with no recorded political collapse? The deeper data sets were restricted. Excavation zones were tightly controlled by state authorities. Artifacts were removed under military supervision and stored in facilities not accessible to independent researchers. No one denied the city existed. They denied its implications. There was a cost. One Egyptian diver involved in early recovery operations was killed during a rush lift of a submerged statue when a cable failed. His death was recorded as an industrial accident. The recovery schedule did not slow. Today, Thonis, Heraclean is cited as a triumph of underwater archaeology. Proof that ancient texts can be trusted, but it is also carefully framed as an isolated event, a unique port, a singular disaster. What is not emphasized is how closely its story mirrors others. Advanced coastal city, sudden submersion, long dismissal, late rediscovery, controlled interpretation. The sea did not erase Thonis, Heraclean. Time did not forget it. It was known, then ignored. Over 64 major structures were cataloged before excavation limits were imposed. The fifth site was never buried deep enough to stay quiet. In 1968, pilots flying over the shallow waters near North Bimini in the Bahamas noticed something unusual beneath the surface. In clear conditions, a linear formation was visible just below the waves. When divers entered the area, they found a stone structure stretching nearly half a mile, composed of massive rectangular limestone blocks arranged in a single file line. Each block weighed several tons. Each sat flush against the next. It looked like a road. It looked intentional. It looked wrong. The formation became known as the Bimini Road. Initial surveys showed blocks with sharp edges, flat tops, and consistent thickness. Some appeared stacked, with smaller stones beneath larger capstones, suggesting layered construction. The alignment followed a deliberate curve, not random scatter. The stones were not tumbled. They were placed. Then the measurements complicated everything. The blocks shared near identical dimensions. Gaps between them were uniform. In several areas, right angles appeared where stones met. Core samples taken from beneath the formation suggested the structure predated current sea levels, implying construction when the area was dry land over 10,000 years ago. That date was never embraced. Almost immediately, the explanation hardened around a safer idea: beach rock. Naturally forming limestone slabs that fracture along straight lines and settle into patterns that resemble construction. It was a clean solution. Geological, non disruptive. End of discussion. One sentence entered the record and stayed there. The Bimini Road may be a natural beach rock formation shaped by erosion and tidal processes. That sentence did a lot of work. But the problems didn't go away. Beach rock typically fractures irregularly. These blocks show consistent thickness and jointing. Some stones had atop others in ways wave action could not explain. Underwater photographers documented smaller stones used as wedges, stabilizing larger blocks. Nature does not shim. The scans disagreed. The placement resisted erosion models. The order persisted. Several researchers who pushed for deeper excavation lost access permits. Funding for extended surveys dried up. No large-scale dig was ever approved that would allow removal of blocks to examine subsurface context. The road could be observed, but not dismantled. There was a cost. One independent diver assisting a private research team suffered permanent spinal injuries during an unapproved descent after official access was denied. He never worked again. The footage he captured remains unpublished. Public interest surged and faded. The site became a tourist dive location, a curiosity, a controversy reduced to a footnote. The word city was never officially attached, despite nearby underwater formations that suggested parallel structures. What made Bimini dangerous was not what it proved, but where it pointed. The location sat squarely in the cultural shadow of Atlantis narratives. That association alone ensured the site would never be treated neutrally. Once myth entered the conversation, dismissal followed automatically. So the road remains. Too straight to ignore. Too shallow to control. Too ambiguous to resolve. No authority conclusively closed the case. They didn't need to. By labeling it natural early, further questions became professionally radioactive, and the stones stayed exactly where they were found. Core samples beneath 3 blocks were never publicly released. The 6th city was found intact, orderly, and undeniably human. That made it dangerous. In 1984, marine archaeologist Ehud Galilei was surveying the seabed off the coast of modern Israel, near the ancient settlement of Et Lit. The water was shallow. Visibility was high. What he encountered was not a ruin scattered by storms, but a settlement frozen in place. Stone houses, paved floors, hearths, storage pits, everything where it had been left. The site would be named Etlitayam. It sat 8 to 12 meters below the surface, sealed beneath layers of sand and silt. Unlike shipwrecks, nothing here had been torn apart. Walls stood in recognizable layouts. Wells remained vertical. Human skeletons lay where they had fallen. This was not abandonment. This was interruption. This was sudden loss. Radiocarbon dating placed Etlitayam at approximately 9,000 years old. Neolithic, pre-pottery. According to the accepted narrative, societies at this stage were small, transient, and technologically limited. Etlitayam contradicted that entirely. The settlement showed organized construction, stone architecture, and long-term planning. At its center stood a stone circle, 7 megaliths arranged around a freshwater spring. Each stone weighed hundreds of kilograms. They were positioned deliberately, not randomly. The spring had been enclosed, protected, engineered. Water management that early was not supposed to exist. Burials revealed something else. Several skeletons showed signs of tuberculosis, the earliest confirmed cases in human history. This was a dense, permanent population living close together long enough for disease to spread. That alone rewrote assumptions about early coastal societies. Then came the explanation for its end. Geological analysis suggested a massive tsunami struck the region, likely triggered by a collapse of the eastern flank of Mount Etna around 8,500 years ago. The wave would have reached the Levantine coast with catastrophic force. Etlitayam had no time to flee. Homes flooded instantly. Wells were contaminated. The sea swallowed the settlement whole. This should have been headline history. Instead, the site was framed narrowly. A unique Neolithic village. An exception. Interesting, but contained. Excavation was limited to surface mapping. Deeper probing beneath the stone circle was discouraged. Tsunami models that implied widespread destruction across the Mediterranean were briefly discussed, then quietly revised. The implication was larger than one village. If Etlitayam existed, then many others like it once lined the coast, now submerged, unmapped, and uncounted. Entire populations erased not by gradual sea rise, but by single events. Civilizations that left no ruins on land because the land itself disappeared. There was a cost. One diver involved in early documentation suffered severe decompression sickness during extended survey dives. He survived, but never returned to fieldwork. His notes were folded into institutional reports, his name absent from citations. Today, Etlitayam is acknowledged in academic literature, but rarely emphasized. It is treated as a snapshot, not a warning, a solitary case, not part of a pattern. But it is part of a pattern. Advanced coastal settlement, sudden submersion, careful framing, and most unsettling detail remains untouched. The stone circle faces no known celestial alignment. Its purpose is still officially unknown. Tsunami impact estimates were revised downward within 2 years of publication. The seventh city was never called a city. That was intentional. For most of human history, the North Sea was not a sea at all. It was land. A vast, Low-lying plain connecting Britain to continental Europe, rich with rivers, forests, and wildlife. Archaeologists would later name it Doggerland. For decades, it was treated as a footnote, an empty corridor crossed by nomadic hunters on the way somewhere more important. Then the oil companies started drilling. In the late 20th century, offshore energy surveys began pulling up something unexpected from the seabed. Not just animal bones, but human tools. Worked flint, spear points, carved antler, fishing traps. Then structural traces, post holes, hearts, patterned debris fields that only form where people live for long periods. Doggerland was not empty. It was inhabited, and it was organized. Seismic mapping used to locate oil. Reserves revealed ancient river systems and elevated plateaus, ideal locations for settlement. Core samples showed repeated layers of human activity over thousands of years. This was not a temporary hunting ground. It was a stable landscape supporting large populations. Some estimates suggested tens of thousands of people lived there continuously. The problem was scale. Doggerland was enormous, larger than modern Great Britain at its peak. Accepting it as a populated region meant accepting widespread settlement across northern Europe far earlier than the standard model allowed. Not villages at the margins, but interconnected communities spread across a drowned continent. The maps didn't stay quiet. The data kept accumulating. The implications kept growing. Advanced fishing weirs discovered underwater showed engineered systems designed to control tides and seasonal migration. These structures required planning, cooperation, and long-term maintenance. They were not improvised. They were inherited. Then came the end. Around 8,200 years ago, a massive underwater landslide off the coast of Norway, the Storegga Slide, triggered a tsunami that tore across Doggerland. Walls of water raced inland. Low-lying regions vanished in hours. Survivors fled to higher ground, carrying fragments of memory, not maps. Doggerland did not decline. It was a race. What followed was silence. Because Doggerland did not fit neatly into the idea of a lost city. It was worse. It was a lost world. Recognizing it fully meant rewriting migration models, population estimates, and the origins of European culture itself. It meant acknowledging that advanced coastal societies existed, thrived, and were destroyed, leaving almost no trace on land. There was a cost. Fishermen who had pulled human remains and carved tools from their nets for decades were told to stop reporting them. Fines were confiscated quietly. Compensation was minimal. Stories stopped circulating. Today, Doggerland appears in academic papers, carefully framed as a submerged landscape. The word civilization is avoided. Settlement density is debated downwards. Urban potential is dismissed as speculative. But the sonar maps remain, road-like pathways, structured zones of activity. Human design stretched across the continent-sized plain. Doggerland was not a myth. It was not a city. It was something harder to dismiss. A populated land erased so completely that history pretended it never needed to be named. Population displacement estimates were revised upward by a factor of 3. The eighth discovery did not wait for permission. The sea forced it into daylight. On December 26, 2004, a tsunami struck the southeastern coast of India. Entire fishing villages were flattened in minutes. When the water finally pulled back, it did more than destroy homes. It exposed stone. Massive work blocks running parallel to the shoreline near Mahabalipuram, a historic temple town long associated with legend. Local tradition had always spoken of the 7 pagodas, 6 great temples, swallowed by the sea. Only one remained on land. For generations, the story was treated as folklore, a metaphor, a warning tale for children. Then the water left. What emerged were walls, platforms, stair-like foundations extending into the surf. Not scattered debris, but aligned architecture. Within weeks, divers from India's National Institute of Oceanography were dispatched. Sonar mapping confirmed it. Multiple submerged structures, arranged deliberately, stretching hundreds of meters offshore. This was not erosion. This was construction. This was a city fragment reappearing. Underwater surveys revealed dressed stone blocks fitted tightly together, some weighing several tons. Foundations sat on level seabed. The layout suggested a complex, not a single temple. Streets or processional paths connected structures now broken by centuries of wave action. Then came the detail that changed everything. Close-range imaging showed linear striations cut into vertical stone faces, parallel grooves, consistent depth, consistent spacing, tool marks. The same pattern recorded years earlier on the submerged monument at Yonaguni, Japan. Same cuts, same angles, same unanswered question. Independent geologists struggled to explain how 2 sites, separated by thousands of kilometers, could share identical stoneworking signatures if both were natural. They couldn't. The explanation retreated into ambiguity. The word possible did heavy lifting. Dating discussions became cautious. Funding became temporary. The age estimates were dangerous. Sea level models suggested the structures were built when the coastline lay far seaward of its current position, more than 10,000 years ago. That placed construction deep into the last ice age, when advanced stone architecture was not supposed to exist anywhere on Earth. The implications were global. If Mahabalipuram's submerged temples were real, then Dwarka was not alone. Yonaguni was not an anomaly. These were coastal civilizations, building monumental stone architecture before the oceans rose, before history agreed to remember them. There was a cost. A local fisherman who guided early survey boats lost his son during the tsunami. The same waters that revealed the ruins took his family. He refused payment for his help and later asked that his name never appear in reports. "Let the stones speak," he said. They did. Excavation was limited. Several exposed blocks were reburied for preservation. Public attention faded as reconstruction efforts on land took priority. The window closed as quickly as it had opened. Today, the 7 pagodas are acknowledged, but carefully. Tourist brochures mention submerged ruins. Academic papers avoid conclusions. No large-scale excavation continues offshore. But the damage was already done. The breadcrumb connected. The pattern tightened. 2 sites, 1 signature. Stone does not forget who shaped it. Identical tool striations were confirmed at 2 sites dated over 10,000 years old. The 10th site did not look like a city. That was a trap. In 2011, a Swedish salvage team called Ocean X was scanning the Baltic Sea floor for shipwrecks. The mission was commercial. No archaeology. No history. Then the sonar image appeared. A circular structure nearly 60 meters wide, resting at a depth of 90 meters. Perfectly symmetrical. Sharp edges. A raised rim. A central depression. It did not resemble geology. It did not resemble wreckage. It resembled manufacture. When the team descended, the anomalies multiplied. The object appeared to sit on the seabed, not embedded in it. Surrounding sediment looked displaced, as if something heavy had settled there suddenly. Rock samples taken from the surface showed signs of heat exposure, material that looked fused, not eroded. Then the instruments failed. Cameras shut down within meters of the structure. Compasses spun. Electrical equipment malfunctioned repeatedly. The team documented what they could and retreated. When the footage was released, the response was immediate and hostile. The formation was labeled a glacial deposit, a natural pile of stone shaped by Ice Age movement. That explanation did not survive contact with the details. The structure contained right angles, internal corridors, a straight, trench-like feature extending away from the object for hundreds of meters, as if something had skidded across the seabed before stopping. Natural ice movement does not carve linear tracks into bedrock. The scans disagreed. The geometry resisted geology. The silence arrived anyway. Funding evaporated. Follow-up dives were discouraged. The Baltic Sea anomaly became a punchline online, stripped of context and buried under ridicule. Once again, myth was weaponized to neutralize data. But here's the hinge. Rock samples retrieved from the site showed machining marks, linear striations cut into stone surfaces, parallel grooves, consistent depth, consistent spacing. The same signature documented at Yonaguni. The same tool pattern recorded at Mahabalipuram. The same unanswered question. This was not one culture. This was not one location. This was a method. There was a cost. One crew member involved in the 2011 expedition suffered permanent hearing damage during a pressure-related incident on a rush dive. He left maritime work entirely. His testimony was reduced to a footnote. The Baltic Sea object was never officially classified as artificial. It was reclassified as unknown geological formation, a category that allows indefinite delay without resolution. No international study followed. No excavation was approved. And yet, something crucial happened. For the first time, a submerged structure was found far from any ancient coastline, far from myths, far from temples, sitting alone in cold water, connected only by data. Which means the pattern no longer belongs to one era, one flood, or one civilization. It belongs to a system. The cities were not just drowned. They were interrupted. and whatever built them did not vanish everywhere at once. Geological status was upgraded to anomalous under restrictive review protocols.